So I have two quick questions. I previously received at work I guess it was a briefing on the 2017 StatsCan's report with persons with disabilities. What's the difference between the one that we saw last year versus what you're referring to that was released several days ago on December 3rd?
Yeah, sorry. I'm not 100% sure I quite understand, but I think I might know what you're getting at. Obviously, the one that was released last year, that was the first release from the 2017 CSD. And over the last year, there have been a number of different releases, but this is sort of the second, I guess, big paper, is it? Yeah, so this is sort of the second big paper coming from it. So using the same data, I think maybe what you might be getting at, because I've heard that question before, and it's, are we redefining people with disabilities? Is this a different way of defining it? And so it's a complicated answer, but I'll start with no. The screening questions are exactly the same. So you're still looking at the same populations. So back in 2010, again, it takes a long time to get data right. Back in 2010, we started redesigning the screening questions for disability. And by 2012, we had something called the disability screening questions. We refer to them as the DSQ. The DSQ uses the social model, and it was designed to make sure that we included people in that middle space as well as the stereotype. So it was always designed to be inclusive of both dynamics and permanent sort of unchanging disabilities. So that's still being used. We haven't redefined it. So we still have that 6.2 million that you saw last year based upon that. But what these new questions that are on the same survey were designed to do was to develop another lens or another dimension through which to understand, be able to identify, so of those people, how many actually look like the stereotype. So it's the same data, the same definition overall. This is not a new definition of disability. It's another lens or another dimension through which to analyze it.
If you could, one short quick question. We were given two questions to respond to over the course of the day. Unfortunately, a few of us don't understand the first question. It was the two question. It was the first one.
Yeah, okay. So let me get to that. What are the strengths or weaknesses of using a relative approach to accessibility? So let me give you an example of relative accessibility. Maybe that will help. I would say all of the instruments that I looked at were absolute accessibility, meaning that they met some measure that was on, for example, a building code. Was the door wide enough? Was it, was it present? It didn't, and if it was, then it was accessible. But it didn't have to be at the front of the building where everybody could enter. So a person in a wheelchair might have to go around to the back of the building and not go with the front door with his co-workers to go to the event. And when we talk about relative accessibility, we're talking about co-workers all being able to enter the same door, all being able to get to the same event, all being able to participate as fully as the person next to them that isn't in a wheelchair. But I don't mean to imply that we're looking at just physical disabilities. We're looking across disabilities, and I was simply using that as an example of relative accessibility. So in order to meet relative accessibility, as I mentioned, the ACA, the CRPD, and the human rights all look at, or all the concepts within that, the vision is for an equal and independent and free choice in places and spaces. Right. And so when we talk about relative accessibility, we're introducing a concept that hasn't been tested before, hasn't been designed in a module, and is that the right one? Should we be looking at something else, or should we be looking at accessibility, relative accessibility, and if so, how do we go about designing that? And that's where we're at right now in terms of conceptualizing that concept. I hope that answered the question.
All right. Thank you. It's Jason again from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. My question's for Tabitha. It's just regarding the your starting point for doing this UNCRPT review. Two-part question. One is, what is your starting point? And two is, what, if any, are your priority areas? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question. And so we're just working on the starting point right now. I think we are trying to come at this, so I'll back it up a step. Canada ratified the CRPD in 2010 and has, not designated a monitoring mechanism for the last 9 years. In that time, various other countries have established frameworks. They've got indicators, they've got models, they've got those kinds of things. So there are models out there. I guess that's all to say that our starting point here is to take all of that under advisement, but to really view this as an opportunity to build something that is a Made in Canada model that works for us. What we find lacking in a lot of the models, there's a very heavy focus on indicators and numbers, and not a good way of monitoring actual lived experience. And so it's a question we're working through right now in those consultations that we're doing to figure out how do we, what we'll be starting with is defining what are the principles here. What is it that people expect before we start getting into the question of how do we get there. So kind of looking at two parts. So again, we're at the beginning of the process, but stay tuned. In terms of priorities, that'll be another focus area of the consultation. Obviously, the CRPD is vast, and so we will need to establish some priorities. And so again, that's something that we're starting with no presuppositions of what those things are.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to take a couple of the questions from Slido. One of them asked, are the benefits reported here taking into account the costs and trade-off of making Canada accessible and inclusive? And I think that relates to what the little bit of a presentation I gave at the beginning. And no, it doesn't. That's just the benefit side. The next stage of that project is actually to do the cost side so that we can put the two together to do a cost-benefit analysis and get the net benefit from that picture and that analysis. Another question was just about, are the PowerPoints available from these presentations? And yes, they are available. And if they're not up on the website currently, we'll be putting them up shortly. Do we want to take another one from the floor?
I just want to interject for a minute and say that I've added a live poll to Slido for Pamela's questions.
Okay.
So if people wanted to respond in there, then we can just forward those responses directly to Pamela.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Data folks, I'm John Ray, Council of Canadians with Disabilities. I think we within CCD want to connect with whomever of you is the point person on this to talk about things like disaggregated data and so forth. Who is the person, whomever of you is the person I need, could you come and find me at some point today, please?
Yes, it'll likely be me, so yes, absolutely.
What's that?
It'll
Who's
likely
the person I need?
It'll likely be me, Mike Burns, so come see me at the break and we can have a conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
I think John may not actually be able to see you, so he might ask you to come see him.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I see you. No
We'll
worries.
take one more question from the floor and then one more question from Slido.
I'm going to phrase this in about two questions. Will be very brief. Within the CSD, Canadian Survey on Disability, the current one seems to miss the point on provincial level data on employment rates of people with disabilities, and as well, area-specific data, as in numbers of people with disabilities that live in a given certain area, which is and this data is critically needed by nonprofits. So within the development of the 2022 CSD, are there any plans to include provincial level data on the employment rate of people living with disabilities and area-specific information as to the amount of people living with disabilities in a given certain area? Thank you.
Maybe I can answer this. Can anybody hear me? If I understand your question, and it's a question that we get a lot, which is, can you give me geographic specific data? Okay. The issue with it is, with the CSD, because we're taking a sample and not the whole population, we have to recognize that once we start to draw down into the data more and more, especially when we get into specific areas, the data is not reliable at that level. We definitely provide, at least at the geography level, at province and territories. Depending on the specifics of the question of what you'd be looking for, it may be possible to drill down further into certain areas. However, I know certainly for me and my analytical team, we wouldn't be able to say off the cuff if you came in with a request until we had a chance to run the data to make sure that are these numbers reliable enough that we can release them, because we do recognize that what people are most interested in is the is specific areas. So the answer is not that no, we can't. The answer is it really depends on what you're looking for. And even then, what we would have to do then is to go back to our data and see, are these numbers that we can actually release, are they reliable? Do we feel confident in these numbers? And so, unfortunately, I can't give you a yes or no to that question, but I at least acknowledge that it is something that we always get coming back to us, is those kinds of requests.
Thank you. And just one last question now from Slido. This is for Tabitha. Now that the Accessible Canada Act is law, do you expect a spike in the number of complaints in different areas such as service provision, procurement, etc.?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what I could say, it's hard to anticipate these things. Certainly we won't be seeing complaints specific to the application of the Accessible Canada Act until we have regulations, and so we don't know when exactly that will be. There's the ability to file complaints, and so certainly there'll be a certain number of complaints that come in with respect to that. It's an open question, I think, whether complaints can concurrently be filed under the Canadian Human Rights Act. I don't think that that's as yet settled, that it is, that being able to file a complaint under the Accessible Canada Act precludes someone from filing under the Canadian Human Rights Act. To the extent that pieces of legislation like the ACA increase awareness about what rights and obligations actually are, I think those things always tend to increase the number of complaints that we receive, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually quite a good thing. That people become more aware of the fact that they do have rights in this area. And so, and I guess the last thing I would say is overall, over the last number of years, I can tell you that we have at the Commission seen an incredible increase in the number of human rights complaints that we receive across all grounds. The numbers on disability, they still make up more than half of our complaints, so because we're getting more complaints overall, that means we're getting more complaints relating to disability as well. And those continue to be about employment and accessibility and all of those kinds of things. So hard to say for sure, but yeah, probably. It probably will be. If I were a betting woman, I would guess, yep.
Okay, well, I'll end it there. Thank you very much once again for our panelists, your presentations. Greatly appreciate your time and insights. Thank you. Another round of applause, please.